You are welcome to yet another episode of HN What's Your Say? The #1 listening show, where we discuss real issues with real people like you. We are still featuring R. Kelly. Real name Robert Sylvester Kelly. Also known as the R&B King. Throughout the prolonged and highly controversial legal pursuit of R. Kelly, a deeply troubling pattern has emerged. One where the line between actual victims and willing participants has been deliberately blurred for the government's convenience. In a justice system that should be built on facts, evidence and the integrity of legal principles, the case against R. Kelly revealed a desperate strategy. When the prosecution ran out of legitimate accusations grounded in verifiable lawbreaking, they turned to a tactic of retroactively redefining the nature of consensual adult relationships. This strategy did not just materialize in a vacuum. It was the inevitable result of years of mounting allegations, many of which had been openly discredited or proven baseless when subjected to scrutiny. But having publicly staked so much on the idea that R. Kelly was a serial abuser, government prosecutors faced an impossible situation. Concede the truth and admit they had no substantial criminal case, or continue to conjure victims where none legally existed. Well, they chose the latter. The most egregious aspect of this approach was the manipulation of stories involving adult women such as Faith Rogers and Lisa Van Allen, who had engaged in consensual relationships with R. Kelly long after reaching the federal age of consent. These were grown women. Individuals fully capable of making their own decisions and accountable for their personal choices. Yet they were retrofitted into the prosecution's narrative as victims not because they had been subjected to crimes, but because the government needed them to be. In legal terms, we can say victimhood requires an actual crime. In this instance, however, victimhood was manufactured by reshaping adult relationships into alleged abuses of power that had no basis in statutory or constitutional law. Take for example the case of Lisa Van Allen. A prime illustration of how unreliable testimonies and shifting personal narratives were exploited by prosecutors desperate to keep their case afloat. Lisa Van Allen had for years presented herself as a victim of R. Kelly. However, it was eventually revealed that the age she initially claimed to have been when meeting him did not align with verified records. In short, to say she was an adult and well above the legal age of consent at the time of her involvement with him. Had this information not come to light, she would have likely remained on the so-called victim list and positioned to benefit financially through restitution claims alongside other accusers. The government's quiet retreat from using Lisa Van Allen as a star witness wasn't driven by a sudden burst of integrity, but by the undeniable reality that her age would collapse one of their key narratives. If the justice system had been functioning impartially, her removal should have prompted a broader reassessment of all accusers' claims. Instead, it underscored a selective approach to justice: discard any witness whose story no longer serves the desired conclusion while continuing to parade others whose accounts are equally questionable, provided they can still be positioned as victims. Well, this is exactly what happened. This is the core problem with the government's case against R. Kelly. The relentless drive to classify any and every woman who had a relationship with him as a victim irrespective of the facts, their age at the time, or even the consensual nature of their interactions. In doing so, the prosecution bypassed the very foundation of criminal law, that an individual cannot be deemed a victim absent of a crime. No one disputes the importance of protecting actual victims of abuse. But the integrity of the legal system hinges on its ability to distinguish between authentic cases of victimization and adult relationships that, while perhaps unconventional or morally debatable in the public eye, do not constitute criminal acts. The attempt to categorize every adult woman associated with R. Kelly as a victim was not an act of justice. It was a last-ditch maneuver to justify years of accusations that could not withstand the scrutiny of objective legal standards. It's also important to understand the broader implications of this prosecutorial strategy. By blurring the line between real victims and consenting adults, the government not only jeopardized the fairness of R. Kelly's trial, but also set a dangerous precedent for future cases. If adult individuals can be retroactively labeled as victims simply because their relationships in hindsight appear unorthodox or controversial, then the entire premise of personal agency and consent is rendered meaningless. Legal safeguards exist to protect both actual victims and the falsely accused. And in this case, the government ignored one side of that equation. Again, let's keep in mind that the implications of these judicial mistakes extend beyond R. Kelly. This case revealed a systemic issue within the justice system. When prosecutors become so invested in a particular narrative that they refuse to adjust in the face of conflicting evidence, the result is not justice but a performance masquerading as law. The decision to transform adult, consensual relationships into fictitious crimes reflects a prosecutorial mindset more concerned with preserving appearances than adhering to legal principles. Consider how many of the so-called victims in this case were adults at the time they met R. Kelly. Their ages were not ambiguous and their consent not absent. They willingly entered into these relationships and maintained them for extended periods, and in some cases sought financial or career benefits from them. While one might question the dynamics of those relationships, they were not criminal under the statutes the government invoked. Yet for the sake of sustaining their case, prosecutors were willing to disregard these fundamental realities. One must also question the motive behind such a strategy. Beyond salvaging a faltering case, there were financial and reputational incentives at play. Under restitution laws, individuals classified as victims in federal cases are entitled to financial compensation, creating a tangible incentive for those involved to maintain their status as victims, irrespective of the factual or legal basis for that designation. In the absence of genuine underage victims, the government's case became increasingly reliant on adult women whose stories could be reinterpreted to fit the narrative. In truth, though, if the case had been prosecuted on merit alone, focusing solely on instances where verifiable evidence demonstrated actual criminal conduct, it would have collapsed long before reaching a jury. But the prosecution's decision to reinvent consensual adult relationships as crimes allowed them to fill the courtroom with accusers, inflate restitution claims, and present an illusion of pervasive abuse where none existed under the law. Lisa Van Allen's situation perfectly encapsulates this point. Initially positioned as one of the government's primary witnesses, her usefulness ended the moment it became impossible to maintain the falsehood about her age. Had this fact not surfaced, she would still be regarded as a victim today, her testimony shaping public perception and legal outcomes alike. This revelation alone should have prompted a comprehensive re-evaluation of every accuser's claims. Instead, it was quietly buried under the sand, and the prosecution pressed on with other equally dubious witnesses who had been changing statements and flipping from one camp to another from time to time. This practice of retroactive victimhood was not a small procedural error but rather a fundamental violation of due process. It ignored the principle that criminal cases must be adjudicated based on evidence of actual unlawful conduct, not manufactured narratives constructed to save face or to satisfy public expectation. In doing so, the government undermined not only R. Kelly's right to a fair trial, but also the integrity of the criminal justice system itself. To frame adult women as victims when they willingly entered into relationships with R. Kelly is to deny them the agency and autonomy that the law recognizes in every adult citizen. Consent is a major factor of legal and ethical interactions between adults, and to retroactively strip it away for the sake of a prosecution narrative is to do violence to the very concept of personal freedom. The case against R. Kelly serves as a cautionary tale about what happens when prosecutors prioritize conviction rates and public opinion over the objective pursuit of justice. By conflating consenting adult relationships with criminal victimization, they did more than target one man. They assaulted the very legal standards meant to safeguard everyone. In the end, this approach did not bring society any closer to the truth. It instead obscured it. By labeling consenting adults as victims, the prosecution denied the public an honest reckoning with what did and did not occur. It transformed complex adult relationships into one-dimensional prosecutorial talking points, preventing a real understanding of both the individuals involved and the legal standards at issue. The pursuit of justice demands better than this. It requires a commitment to facts, to legal definitions, and to the fundamental rights of both the accused and the accusers. In the case against R. Kelly, that standard was abandoned in favor of expediency and narrative control. As the legal system continues to grapple with this case and its implications, one truth remains undeniable: the deliberate misclassification of consenting adults as victims was a prosecutorial strategy and not a reflection of reality. And until that is fully acknowledged, the case against R. Kelly will remain a blemish on the promise of fair and impartial justice in the United States. That is all we had for you today on HN What's Your Say. To keep updated whenever we post a new video, subscribe to this channel now. Also remember to hit the bell icon and enable notifications. And feel free to share your opinions with us in the comment section below, and let us know if you would like us to publish your views in our next release. We value all our subscribers' opinions.